Hello, chess fans. This is chess teacher Tui, Micah Tui, and I'm back with the second game of my series of Bobby Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games. I got some feedback from the first video I did. A lot of it wasn't very nice, but I'm going to try to get better as I do these videos and try to make better chess videos in general, so I'd ask you to bear with me. I am doing this for free, so you get what you pay for. Okay, so this is game two of Bobby Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games. It was played in Portorož, which is a seaside town in what is now the Republic of Slovenia, and it was played at the 1958 Interzonal, which is the tournament that was the prequel for the Candidates Tournament in 1959. In that tournament, there were a number of people who then qualified to go to the Candidates Tournament. The top six finishers were able to go on to the Candidates Tournament. And they were Misha Tal, Svetotar Gligoric, Tigran Petrosian, Paul Benko, Fredrik Olofsson, and of course the final qualifier was the young 16-year-old Bobby Fischer, who finished a half point over a lot of very, very powerful masters, including David Bronstein, who is a world championship candidate, Yuri Averbakh, who is one of the leading Soviet masters, and other luminaries like Laszlo Szabo and Ludek Pachman, also very, very important chess people. Going on to the Candidates Tournament, Tal did not finish in the top half, but had a valiant effort. He scored 12.5 out of 28, and he came in overall fifth. He tied in shared fifth with Master Gligoric, and he finished behind Tal, Kiers, Petrosian, and Smyslov. So that's kind of the historical background, but let's bring it to the game. So they're in Portorož, and this game is Bobby Fischer against Bent Larsen, the Dane, who himself would become a world champion contender in later years. Bent Larsen, actually before this game, thought that he would be able to beat the kid rather easily, referring to Bobby Fischer, and help his place up in the standings, wanting to qualify for the Candidates Tournament. An interesting note about this interzonal, in previous Candidates Tournaments, they had much larger fields. So this was going to be a Candidates Tournament with a smaller field. Only 8 players were going to be in the 1959 Candidates Tournament, and 2 of them had already qualified. The ex-world champion Vasily Smyslov, who had been dethroned by Mikhail Botvinnik, as well as Paul Kiers, who had finished second in the candidates the previous cycle. So there were only 6 slots open for the Candidates Tournament, and Bobby Fischer, even though he was very young, 15, 16 years old, he managed to just barely qualify in 1958, which is an incredible achievement. So in this game, he has the white pieces, and he's coming up against Bent Larsen, who would go on to great chess fame and was, for a while, probably the second best player outside of the Soviet Union. So Bobby Fischer begins with e4. That was Fischer's favorite patent move for most of his career. And Larsen plays c5, the Sicilian defense. So let's start with the annotations from Larry Evans. This is game 2, Slaying the Dragon. Larry Evans writes, although the Sicilian, as a whole, is still the best fighting defense at Black's disposal, much of the steam has been taken out of the time-honored dragon variation. That's the variation with the Fian-shadowed king's bishop. This is one of the key games that helped to batter its reputation. In a laudable attempt to create complications, Larsen deviates from the book on move 15. That proves to be disastrous since his counterattack never gets started. Mechanically, routinely, Fischer pries open the h-file, sacrificing first a pawn and then the exchange. There is an aura of the inevitable around the outcome. Here the notes are as instructive and lucid as the text, which is an object lesson in how to mount an assault against the Fian-shadowed king's position. And that's Larry Evans' introduction to the game. So after c5, Fischer writes, the Sicilian defense had gained popularity as the number one response to e4 in the 1950s, and largely due to the Soviet masters. That is correct. It was the Soviets and their counterattacking style that really made popular the Sicilian defense in the 40s and 50s. Fischer continues, knight f3, Larsen plays d6, Fischer plays d4. This is a standard Sicilian exchange in the center. C takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, defending e4, and g6, indicating the dragon variation. Now, this is not the only way one can get into the dragon. Sometimes certain players will actually play a6 first, which is called the Najdorf variation. And this can often be a preparatory move before we get into the dragon variation. So you don't have to play g6 right away to play the dragon. a6 is perfectly playable as well. Some other main lines of the Sicilian, just to give you a quick history lesson. This e5 leads into the main lines of the Sveshnikov variation, which usually continues knight d to b5. Also, this is the Scheveningen variation of the Sicilian with this small pawn center. And of course, as we said, the Najdorf, named after Miguel Najdorf from Argentina. And of course, this move is also playable. It's not particularly common, but knight c6 is also playable. So, Larsson, however, goes right into the dragon. And then this, and then Fischer plays bishop e3, which is called the Yugoslav attack. Fischer writes, "The beautiful thing about the Yugoslav attack is that the attack almost plays itself. The ideas are simple enough that even I knew what to do when playing against the dragon. But it's not so simple as Fischer would make it seem." So I've just moved from Fischer's notes to my own. In 1995, when Garry Kasparov defended the world title against Vichy Anand, he played the Sicilian Dragon 4 times, winning and drawing twice. So it's not quite as simple as Fischer makes it seem, winning against the dragon, but there was a lot of theory to that. So we'll continue with the Larsson plays bishop to g7, which is the standard next move, and Fischer makes the point that knight g4 loses to bishop b5 check. So if black tries this early harassment, knight g4, then trying to dislodge the bishop or have an advantageous trade, at this point in the position, this actually loses a piece because, as Fischer points out, you can play bishop b5 check, and this is probably the most commonly known trap in the dragon. So if black, for example, blocks with bishop d7, then what will happen is very, very simple. This knight is now hanging because the bishop is pinned. So white can just very easily win the knight. However, if he plays knight c6 to block instead, then you can win the exchange as well as a pawn, because after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, and then white wins the exchange. So instead of knight g4, Larsson plays bishop g7. And then Fischer responds with f3. And this is not only reinforcing the center, but it also prevents knight g4 after black castles when the trick bishop b5 check is no longer available. So this is to prevent knight g4. Larsson castles, kingside, queen d2. This is creating a battery for which to try to perhaps exchange black's dragon bishop. Then Larsson plays knight c6. Fischer plays bishop c4. And he writes, "This refinement supersedes the old queenside castle. The idea is to prevent d5. And Larsson plays knight d4. And Fischer writes, "Just how black can attempt to thread his way to equality is not clear. Donald Byrne's 9a5 is the strongest reply, and if g4 and if knight e5, etc." So this is what Fischer is talking about. He says this is black's strongest reply. Instead of that, they should play a5, and then after g4, knight e5, bishop e2, d5, g5. And so this way, he says, wins a pawn, which is clear because after the knight has to flee the defense of d4 now, you see that d4 is in fact hanging. Let's go back. Knight d4, takes d4, and Fischer plays bishop takes d4, and then bishop e6, bishop e3, and queen a5. Then Fischer castles queenside, and Larson plays b5. So Fischer writes, after bishop takes b3 and then c takes b3, black cannot make any attacking headway against this particular pawn configuration. White is lost in the king and pawn ending, it's true, but black usually gets mated long before then. As Tarrasch put it, before the endgame, the gods have placed the middle game. So let's look at what Fischer's talking about. He says, if instead of queen a5, if after bishop b3, bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and then he suggests after a6, which is a mistake, you castle. This pawn configuration, he suggests, while it is winning for black, Fischer is suggesting that the kingside attack that is going to come for white or come for black in this position is simply going to be too strong, so that black's endgame advantage will not be able to triumph. That's the idea. So bishop takes b3, and after that, there's no way in which Fischer suggests that black is going to be able to have enough counterplay to survive the middle game. So with that, we're going to stop, and I'm going to stop this video and then start making another one, because unfortunately my videos can only be so long, but we will continue this in part 2.